I want to take you a trip down memory lane from Bill Walker. This is the things that I would call out as the highlights of how the church has progressed and developed, and key things that helped us break through to be able to help people every time the church changed in its complexion. Because the church changes in its complexion every time it grows or moves to a building or takes on a particular emphasis. The late 80s, and I wasn't there at that time, so this is a sacred memory for me, to tune in and to remember and to pay attention to the kinds of things that God did then in order to honor that as we move forward into the future. A small group of relationally connected believers in that very first stage deeply longed to see their friends reconciled to God. They wanted to reach others. In the early 90s, as the church grew from the work they were doing interpersonally and through some of the organizational work, there was noticeably in the church, when I came in 1991, a high concentration of artistically gifted kind of people. People that were good in music, not only good, but trained in it, geniuses in some sense in it, in writing it, in producing it, and delivering it, and the other arts, visual arts, and the dramatic arts, that somehow God had concentrated a large numbers. We paid attention to that. We listened, we watched. We started the Passion at that time. We thought this could be something we could do to make a statement about God's love. In the mid-90s, Willow Creek came on the scene, and they were figuring some things out about how to use large group events, not just to speak to the insiders, but to speak to the insiders in such a way that those outside could access it a little bit. It was their language, it was their culture. The only thing that was different, it wasn't their truth. And they were okay with people who didn't believe their truth as long as they could continue to proclaim it in a life-changing way. Willow Creek became a mentor for us, and we were being trained by it. We wouldn't probably agree with everything they believed, but we liked what they were doing and how they were doing it. Saddleback came on the scene in the late 90s. Rick Warren wrote a book. Before he wrote The Purpose-Driven Life, he wrote The Purpose-Driven Church. And in 1995, Tim and I read that and thought, light bulb, a church that's purposeful. That was just a way of articulating what we felt we were doing with the Great Commission, but we weren't able to do it in a way that could include others, to encourage and empower the leaders around us to move forward in some kind of organized, systematic way in order to reach people and help them grow in their faith. Rick got onto some things there that helped us. As we worked that process, we realized we can't keep doing this way. The way we were doing it, what we experienced at the church was cafeteria-style church, where there just was about everything you can imagine to be done, we were doing it. And I, for one, as a leader that was caught right in the middle, I was pulled way too many places. And what it ended up setting us up to say yes to everything, allowed us to say no to nothing, and ultimately allowed us to say yes to nothing. Because when you say yes to everything, you can't say yes to the right things. North Point came on the scene in the early aughts, and we were being pointed there by some other leaders and reading and watching, and some were investigating more deeply. Their beliefs are very similar to ours if you look at their doctrinal beliefs, probably more similar than any other church that I would think that impacted us in that way, that we were learning from. And yet they were doing some really novel things when it came to articulating a strategy of church that could be set up to help people grow, and no matter what size it got. It was what we call scalable. It was a scalable approach that could continue to increase in its size and yet still be effective at the very core of what we're about. You see, because it's not about models of church. We hear it talked about that way, but sometimes that's the way sound bites and bumper stickers sound when that's all you hear. But it's not about a model of church. It's about being able to do what God has called us to do better and better and better. And being mentored and being trained, and it's about being faithful to our DNA. It's about always remember that we're not the only ones in the scene. We're in the middle of the scene. There are people before us, and hopefully there'll be people after us. And we're going to be faithful stewards to hand this thing off as we had gotten it. And I want to encourage you that if you haven't got these messages, and you want to track with the church a little bit, and you want to actually be a partner and help make it happen, you're going to want to get these talks and kind of keep them close by to understand what we're doing. They're the two biggest ideas that will work in the fabric of the church. The first one, first week he did in January, not the very first weekend because we did that worship time, but the first one of the series from 2020 Vision was one on reaching people for Christ, that we've always been a church that cares about those who are far from God, those who do not know how much God loves them. They've not been able to taste it. They've not been able to experience it. And maybe they've never had it expressed to them in an understandable, intelligible way where they can make a choice to trust him and believe in him for who he is. We want to be a church that's about that. In everything we do, we want to be mindful. We never get away from the work that was accomplished by God through Jesus Christ on the cross and how much he loves each and every one of us and each and every one of the people that we get eye contact through our lives. The second given we have is that spiritual growth is a relational process. So we know we want to be reaching people, so there's always going to be new people around. So it's likely that the church is always going to be increasing in its influence and expanding just because that's what kind of God does. He expands his influence through people who trust him and believe him and work along with him. And it ends up that it becomes influential, and becomes influential, there's people. And when there's people around, it's easy to lose your way as to what you need to stay true to. And we had to wrestle and think about what it means to help people grow. And it's not as complex as we make it to be, as he indicated. That whatever it is that happens, and it's multifaceted, it's God's word and his indwelling Holy Spirit and the friendship and the relational connection to people around us that pulls us into a greater and greater understanding of God and what he's like and how he sees us. And it causes us to warm up to him, and it causes us to wonder about him, and it causes us to want to get close to him as we see him coming after us and we grow relationally with him. And then it causes us to want to make sure that the people around us are experiencing what we're experiencing from God. Love. We get it from God. And if we're what we need to be, we channel it to other people. We don't make it up on our own. We don't muster it up on ourselves. We see it in him, and we reflect it to others, and we grow. And we don't go by like a mile marker, like we're in some kind of race in that sense. Oh, I passed the 12-mile mark, and we're in a dynamic process in which we're always growing. And so Tim and I realized we always need to be in community. And there's certain ones that can speak to us and certain people that we can feel comfortable with so that they can know that we have not arrived and we need their help and we can't do it without them. And there is no such thing as progress that we have in and of ourselves. It's something that God is relationally producing between him and I, and you and him, and the people around you. Staying true to those givens is staying true to our DNA. We realized we face two challenges, and these are the things I wanted to share. The two challenges we face every time we make decisions about how we're going to approach church, because we've done it a number of different times as we've moved through a series of growth and expansion and just dynamics within the church life. We face two unique challenges every time. Number one, the challenge of picking a way. We have to pick a way to do church. I wish we could do it every way that I can think of in my head that would be satisfactory to every person that I know that has talked to me about how to do church and places that I've experienced church and good things from this church and good things from that church. You end up with schizophrenia. That's what you end up with. You get at a place of schizophrenia where you just feel like you're bumping into a new personality every time you take a turn. And you know what? Schizophrenia doesn't benefit anybody. It may benefit you because we were able to include in your idea or my idea, but it doesn't benefit the people that God has in mind, which is those outside, those coming in, those trying to make sense of it. So you have to pick a way. I'll go into more of that. Number two, we have to keep it simple so everyone has time and energy to pursue the vital relationships. You have to keep it simple so we can all work from some simple concepts and continue to work together out from those. I want to unpack these for you. We had to pick a way. Every church has to pick a way. It's essential. It's essential to pick a way of how we're going to do our faith as it is to understand the tenets of our faith. The two things go hand in hand, as Tim indicated. I set him up with the orthodontics comment. I was over there. He said, what was that one called, Bill? Because in 9 o'clock service, he said he was trying to find the orthopraxy word. And the only reason I can find it because it's on my notes. You know, it's not like I know it any better than him in that way, but I have it on my notes. Tim, is it orthodontist? Ortho, I think, is just is orthodox, is to keep to an orthodoxy, to keep the what is known, what is right, what is true, what is solid, what you can build on, what you never dispense of. We've had orthodoxy forever in the life of the church in some ways. From when the first pens could write down not only the Bible, but their understanding of the Bible and the essential tenets of our faith and what distinguishes the Christian faith from even other faiths. There's 8 to 10 to 12 of those doctrines. And they've been worked on and massaged and looked at by brilliant men and women who understand ideas and how they fit together. And it's helped us understand the critical ideas. At the same time, those ideas have to be delivered. They have to be brought to people. You know, they don't just pass on by osmosis. There's a delivery system. There's a process. There's something the church has always been doing but hasn't been as cognitively or maybe as consciously aware of how that affects the message. And you all learn this if you take Communication 101, is that the method, the delivery system, has almost as much impact as the truth itself, because it's the two things working together in which the truth is conveyed. Let me illustrate this from a story that Tim told a couple weeks ago about Jacob Allen, the teenager who was lost in the mountains of the Monongahela. Is that right? See, now I have the trouble with the Monongahela and the Monongahela. Yeah, see, you don't know. Nobody out here. Yeah, I'm looking around. Monongahela forest. It was lost. And when it started, it was just family, you know. Jacob was valuable. He's very valuable to somebody who lived with him and loved him because they knew him. They would not want him to be lost. Being lost alerted them. They looked for him. They called a circle around them. They called a circle around them. And then expanded out from an interpersonal circle to a system of search and rescue. I marvel at how that system evolved because we were one of the first ones down there outside the family. We were called on a Sunday afternoon, as he mentioned. We thought, well, let's do some of our meetings on the road down, on the road back, and let's help this family find their son. We'll be done this afternoon. We can catch dinner and, you know, on our way back up through in Thomas or Davis, you know, go to one of the restaurants. And no, turned to the second day, turned to a third day and a fourth day. And as that process continued through the week, they became more and more systematic. What I marveled at was that you could have not bumped into anybody during that time who would not have said that Jacob was worth looking for. They bought into what we were doing. They were with it from the start. There was a guy I met who knew somebody who heard somebody that knew Jacob. And he was there as if he was Jacob's brother. And he was bound and determined to find Jacob because he knew the value of finding someone who was lost. And Tim made the point to say, that's how much people matter to God. But what I found, but people didn't want to do it the way they were being asked to do it. And that when they were not willing to do it the way they were asked to do it, it wasn't about anybody being in charge or any way. It was that there was a way picked so that collectively they could have the greatest amount of likelihood of finding Jacob, because some people have worked on this. There's a strategy to it, and they thought long and hard about it, and they asked people to play a part. By the fourth day, I got on a team, and it just blew my mind how people didn't have that perspective. We're a part of a team that's part of a strategy that's part of a vision. I notice you all buy into the vision, even myself, but it's real hard to buy into the strategy in such a way that we really make progress. It's not about a perfect strategy. It's about picking away. Just a funny story for you. There were like 10 of us, and in the fourth, it was actually the third or the fourth day. The fourth day I was off with someone else on another all-day search when they found him. They found him on the fourth day. But the third day was very, very serious. They only wanted people to go in certain areas that were just physically hard to search because Jacob was in pretty good shape. Jacob could have gotten almost anywhere because he hiked a lot, he was physically fit, and he's driven. Just with his autism, if he started going, he would go. Who knows where he would be? And so we started to search on the third day, some of those almost impassable areas. So we're going up there already, know it's going to be hard. We have a specific area we're supposed to search, and we do not get to our place of searching because the team doesn't understand. We have to get to our place. They wanted to just search for Jacob. There were individuals that were just so convinced that we had to find Jacob, they weren't going to work the strategy we had. And I submit to you, it happens to us. I submit to you, that's what happens to churches, is that sometimes even our own conviction that the vision is what we need to be about can actually work itself out in such a way that we're counterproductive to each other. We're working against each other. We're undermining what God is trying to do. So we had 2 members of the team wander off on their own because we were looking for a certain geographical point to know that we were at the corner of our search area. Once we got to that, we were going to fan out, stay in eye contact with each other, and sweep the area so you don't have gaps that you missed, right? We had a plan. We had a strategy. I think we need to go over here, and they just pulled off. Next thing you know, they were lost because we had radio contact with the command center who was keeping track of the searchers to make sure they didn't become lost, because that's why we're there. So we ended up with 2 more lost. So here we go. Okay, now we're searching for Jacob. We're searching for Pete. Pete ain't there. I don't know where Pete didn't. He ain't there. We're searching for David too. All right, now we go back and we report. We didn't meet our search place, and what happened? We lost a couple people. And isn't that what it's like in church? We lose people because we don't go together. God did not say, Bill, I want you to reach the world for Christ. Now, I need to own that personally because there's something that happens when I own that personally, but it was given to us. And so our approach to church is not about me or about you or about him or about her, because it's about us. And it's about working together to move forward, to be effective at reaching people for Christ and raising them up, respecting the simple, God-ordained relational process that he's been using since the very beginning, working those in. Let me turn to Mark 14. I want to show you in the scripture here to illustrate this same point that we had to pick away. God had to pick away when it came to the redemption of all of us. Mark 14:32 through 36 says, Then they came to a place called Gethsemane. He said to his disciples, Stay here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him and began to feel distressed and anguished. Human emotions, the human part of Jesus. Fully human, fully God. Fully experiencing exactly what you would experience when you're at that point in your life, which I would contend that nobody has ever been. Nobody knew as clear as Jesus did when he would die and how he would die. He happened to know that. I don't think he knew it through divine revelation. I think he knew it through understanding the scriptures. Tim might have a difference of position, and I'll defer to him because he's the orthodoxy guy. And I'm, working on the orthopraxy. But I think it's helpful for us to see that he was fully human. He's experiencing these emotions, and they're related to a plan. They're related to direction. They're related to having picked a way. He said to them, My anguish is so great that I feel as if I'm dying. Wait here and stay awake. After walking a little farther, he fell to the ground and he prayed that if it were possible, he might not have to suffer what was ahead of him. And so he prays, like you and I would. Can there be a different way? There's lots of ways. Can there be a less costly way, a different way for us to do this? He says, Abba, Father, you can do anything. It's possible for you to change this. He says, take this cup of suffering away from me, but let your will be done rather than mine. I think we jump to that last statement, and we're sometimes so unwilling to understand how painful it is to unite together in believing and staying accountable to the same orthodoxy for the sake of others that we're passing things on to, but also to work at it in a way that produces substantial unity. And so what happened here with Jesus is he's showing this struggle. He was part of the Godhead. We've got to think that he was part of the planning process. He would have known the plan. He would have known the plan really well. Yet his human emotions and experiences were such that he was feeling the pressure of what it feels like to have to go about it according to a plan that maybe doesn't fit him right off or gel with him. I just wanted to warn you to be on guard because I think, as Tim indicated, as alluded to, I think the greatest amount of disunity that occurs in a church has to do with following a plan. A plan not for the church, A plan not for your leader or my leader or me or you, but a plan that's put in place for the sake of other people, the sake of others. Philippians 2, 1 through 4 says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. In this passage, we see both the bent toward reaching outsiders and the growing relationally together. They're infused with one another. I want to say that about picking away, one last thing, that your experience in this room is largely a result of having picked away. Just about everything we do in here, we prayerfully and do with the idea that we have a way that we're doing it for the sake of other people. And when you choose a way, by implication, you don't choose a lot of other ways. And that's where we have a lot of the rub. And I realize that's what happens to folks. And you feel for them because you want to, but you realize you can't because you have to pick. You have to pick the way. Number two, then, that I said we have to keep it simple so everyone has time and energy to pursue the vital relationships. You have to keep it simple because I've seen it happen in church. You can have so much activity going and everybody thinking the activity is good because we're doing it for God, that they even forsake the coveted, contractual, and committed relationships that they know they should be about for the sake of good. I've seen plenty of church leaders say, well, I was serving God, so I left my wife and I went to another country, and I just can't, you know. If that's where I end up, then you can say the same thing about me. I can't see how they connect. Coveted, committed relationship for the sake of serving God. It's not about serving God. It's about a relationship with God. It's about a relationship with God. So we picked the simple process then, and this is what we wanted to say. We don't have this all figured out. What we have figured out is the idea that we can set some big features to the terrain. We can put a topo map together that you can orient yourself with around the church. Whether you're just checking things out, you can begin to orient yourself and say, okay, I can go with that. I can go along with that and see where this goes. You've been with the church a while, you can maybe unlock some other things. It can maybe answer the question about yes and no, and it can equip you to work forward together in a united fashion. So we just really put the biggest features on the map right now, and you and I and others and all the circles we're in will begin to put other features on the map as we work our way out from this big picture idea. And here it is. It's vision related to reaching people for Christ, coupled with honoring the relational process that we feel God uses to raise people up and to grow them in their faith. And it's centered on people, so we want to do it like this. We want to talk about it in terms of where people are at, where they're at. We're always guests. We're always welcome guests according to God. God is always wanting to interact with you and I in a very gentle, very respectful, very non-changing kind of way. This is me. Who are you? How are you doing? What's it like to be you? Where are you at? A guest. God brings everybody to himself through this process of honoring the fact that they're kind of guests. They're checking things out. They're wondering whether I'm real or not. I understand that. And I'm willing to engage them where they're at. As a church, we have environments that are set up primarily to keep in mind that everybody's a guest. And when you have guests in your house, you approach it a certain way. You take it at a certain pace. And you make sure certain things don't come out. Those things might be true, but they're not beneficial at this point. You keep the guests in mind. And so we're thinking we always want to be a church that's providing a place for guests, that we're intentionally giving that to people and say, we want to have guests. We're going to have guests there at that. Okay, keep it in mind. We have guests. It's good. It's helpful for us. We don't want them to stay as guests. not because we have an agenda, not because we need to be successful, but because we do care about them, because Christ cares about them. We want to see them move. So we're thinking we want to see people growing or moving. We want them to go from being a guest to being a friend to somebody else. It isn't just new interaction. It isn't just, hi, how are you doing? On the surface stuff that we need to do. Now we can go down a little farther and share our life a little bit and talk about the things that maybe we've never talked about before. Many of you maybe never have talked about in a friend setting the idea of God and who He is and what He's like and what He thinks about you, what He thinks about the person next to you. It's in friendship that we can begin to talk about the things that really matter to us. We love to see people move. And so we create environments that will be thinking, it's a friend environment. Let's go with what God is doing here. Let's create it so He can work and honor the fact that He is relationally moving people toward Himself. And the final destination we'd love to see everybody be in is the same destination that God has. He wants to see everybody be a part of His family. He'd love to see everybody understand what He did on the cross, trust Him, and be transferred from a kingdom of darkness, the Bible says, from a life of death to a life of life into His family, where you belong. And, family is family. Stinky feet, burping and hanging out, TV on, talking, yelling at one another. What's going on? Family. Oh, okay, we don't have to fake it here? Oh, this is what we really are. That's nice. We're all the same. Man, isn't that great what Christ did for us? I'm glad it doesn't depend on us being perfect people, But that's family you're not going to scare people away, because family should be able to hang with you, And we want to get everybody to the point where they understand that, how much God hangs with them and how they can hang with each other. So it's a simple process. Our strategy is to create environments then where people are encouraged and equipped to pursue the three vital relationships. We're going to make settings as a church with resources and leadership and volunteers and all of those things that we have in our world, buildings and facilities and all that. We're going to use that, but what we're going to do is we're going to use that to create settings where people can move from being guests to friends to family. And the three primary types of environments we're going to make, right now we're thinking we got larger group meetings that are mostly guest-oriented. They're for gathering crowds and sharing truth in really broad, applicable ways in order to express this idea that church is for everyone. It's accessible to everyone. We'll stay on the everyone ideas. And then from there, we'll point people to more specific places where they can receive spiritual truth tailored to their demographics, where they are in life, the stage of life, their interests, their mindset, things like that. So we will point people from the large groups to the medium-sized groups. And in the medium-sized groups, we'll have things like college and high school, marrieds and women, men, singles. Eventually, we want to have a really good friend environment for singles. It's not that we've not wanted to do it. We've wanted to get these clear, simple topographical map things set up so that we're not running things in their own orbit. We're not running things out on their own, that they come from this core idea that we want to see people move along. And so a lot of the choices we'll make will be made because we want to see people move, and we think we have an idea of how that will happen. And so it's been a while. We were committed to helping singles get relationally connected, not as a dating service or an end in itself, but so that we can see them move from there then into rich, meaningful community where they can be there for one another in that spiritual growth process. So we have medium groups. So for medium groups, we point them to small groups. Just so you know, then on this weekend, we have starting point orientation that happens right after the service here. That's for anybody who would be considered kind of a guest and wanting to move along this process. We'd love for you to go in there because we feel like that brings up the topic of conversation that everyone needs to grapple with early on in the process. It's the big story of the Bible and what God is all about. We got to get those things straight, because if you end up down in the family and you don't have those things straight, there's a lot of things that doesn't work for you in the family. So we'd love people to go in that environment and get that stuff and experience community and then possibly move on into small groups from there. We have Group Link, which is a medium-sized event where you'll meet some friends and possibly get into a group. You don't have to get into a group. If it doesn't work, if the friendship thing doesn't work, then come back to group link again. We don't want to force people along the process. And then ultimately, everybody in small groups. You'll notice if you go by the children's wing of the building, you'll see kids in circles on carpets talking with their small group leaders and to each other. This is a safe place where they can develop friendships and learn about faith in God, and also learn the idea that they need each other. And there's an adult in there facilitating that. And as they grow, the adult's influence and the adult's involvement systematically is pulled to a different interaction level. And in high school, we still want to make sure that there's believing adults with authentic faith that have a few things that they're working on that they know they could transfer to the kids when the kids ask. We want to put adults with high schoolers and have them track for their entire time in high school if they can. We'd love to see them track with them right through high school. Who knows where that will go if they are in their life when they're making critical decisions and processing the idea of personal faith in Christ. Not mom and dad's faith now when they're into high school, but where are they? What do they believe and not believe? And is there anyone that they can talk to and be real with? We want to make that happen. These are resource-intensive moves that we're making. And so a lot of you would know that we didn't do the Passion, and I say that as a segue because the reason we are stopping the Passion is because we want to be able to take some of the energy and effort that was put into that and have it go to other places within the church. Okay? The Passion was started, as I indicated, in the early 90s, and it was a great attraction event. It brought all kinds of people into a setting where they could hear what Christ had done, they could experience it in a really moving, passionate way, and they would be presented with the gospel message and then also told that we'd love to have you come to church if you don't have a church home. We were even really careful early on to say, if you don't have a church home, come. If you got a church home, we were hooking them back up with their church home. We did a lot of that infrastructure work early on. That if people indicated, we'd send them over and tell their church, hey, they were here. We weren't trying to necessarily bring them to church. We were trying to attract them to hear what God had done. Well, the service attracts enough people in some ways for us to be able to manage moving along. And so Passion was redundant in its effort because the weekend services now attract 2,500 people on a typical weekend. We've got our work cut out for us to help people find Christ and move along spiritually. So we needed to redistribute some of that effort. But it was over time that we saw that the Passion had outlived its usefulness. It was evidently effective when it came to numbers, but not so effective when it came to strategy, as it became more and more redundant to some things that we were doing and just highly resource intensive. When we started the Passion, we had one large group setting other than it, and that was the weekend service. We had no kids large group meeting at all, barely any kids meetings at all. We had nothing for students in high school or junior high. College was still a small group Bible study thing. Since then, we have, I counted 11 medium to large group settings. They are regularly trying to make better and better so that people can be encouraged and equipped in their faith. We have Kids Stuff, Kids Zone, Heaven's Sake that they're doing over there, Deviate, Wired, 17.3, Marriage Works, Group Link, 58 Conference, Men's Breakfasts, Women's Events. We're eventually going to start something called Family Matters, where we can help families. And we're going to do that singles environment we're talking about, possibly calling that Fusion. But those require a lot of effort, a lot of teamwork, a lot of unity in order to make them work in the big picture. So although we were going to try and wrap the season up this year for the Passion, other intervening factors led us to believe it was best to see what God was doing and say it's done. And it's kind of a heartbreak for me having been producing it all these years because we didn't get to say goodbye in a final season like we were trying to do. We were trying to do final season this year. That was one way we were going to present it to get more to come. The final season was last year, and we're okay with that. Because the Passion was ended for the very reason the Passion was started. As a church, we got more convinced that we want to be about the gospel and that we want to help people in a relational way grow up in their faith. So it's a hard transition, but it's a good one for us, and it's going to produce all kinds of fruit, I believe, on the other side as we get more and more momentum around these big ideas. So I just want to share a story on video here of a couple, Justin and Andrea Stevens. They articulate really well from kind of our seat out there what it's like to see the process of moving from large to medium to small and how people can make progress in their faith that way.
We both grew up in church, but we had been searching for a church for quite a while. And so at that point, we were really looking for something. We were really searching for something, really wanted to get back into the church, get back into a much more close relationship with God.
I think there's a point in young adults' lives where, you just graduated college, and we were in that point. We were in that stage of our lives where it was hectic. You were trying to find a place to live. She was finishing grad school, and you're still trying to leave your parents, and so we were visiting with parents on weekends. So we didn't have a home, and we were looking. I knew in the back of my head that at some point, once we got settled down and we could get some stability in our lives, that we were, that was one of the things on our to-do list, that we needed to find a church.
We did not know anybody, and we are really new to the area. We didn't grow up here, we didn't know anybody, so I know I really wanted to meet people, and it just so happened that one Sunday we were sitting in the auditorium and one of the Starting Point videos came up over the screen, and we both kind of looked at each other after it was over, and I remember Justin saying, "Hey, make a note, I'm interested in that."
I was at a point in my life where, I wasn't in the mode of, I necessarily want to get, involved in the church at that point, but I knew that I personally needed something to start, somewhere to start, and so when I saw that, it just kind of pulled at my heart, and I knew that I was going. For me, it was the very first time in my life that I'd ever talked about the Bible with other adults. I grew up in church, and as kids we, you went to Sunday school, and but as an adult, I had never talked to other adults about the Bible and about God. So it was a first for me.
One day we were talking about Christ's crucifixion and how while he was on the cross he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And that was one of those things that we all seemed to kind of have a little bit of a question about as to, if he knew what was going to go on, how that took place. God can't look upon sin, so that he's just as loving as he is just, and he had to look away at that point. And I don't know, I had never heard that in my life. That was a big moment for me. We learned a lot, though, through the course of the 6-week study that turned into like 9.
Just because I didn't know as much as some of the other people didn't mean that I was in any different of a place in my life compared to them. And just because you have a lot of book knowledge doesn't mean that you're where you want to be. And so I learned that quickly, and so I started to realize that we weren't so different from everybody else after all.
I think through Starting Point I learned that I still had a long way to go, and it really helped to bring forth an environment where I could ask questions and explore my own faith, and through that I really feel as though I was able to find Christ, finally. Well, I remember in our last Starting Point meeting, we talked about where to go from there. I think that was one of those questions that everybody had, okay, what can we do next? And you had talked a little bit about some next steps that we could take after that, and we decided that the next step that we would like to take would be group link. Justin is really big about going step by step through things, whereas I'm more, let's do everything at one time. So we decided that after a few weeks went by, and then the group link was advertised, and we decided we would sign up for that to try to get into a home group. They had some different areas set up for like an all women's group or an all men's group, couples group, and then like an older couples group. So it was pretty easy to kind of figure out which way you were kind of getting directed. We just started talking with a couple young couples. One of the couples had brought their toddler daughter that was just a little bit younger than ours, and that's kind of how the conversation started. And then that brought a few more couples in, and we eventually, the time came, why don't you go ahead and sit down if you would like to start a group, and we all just kind of ended up sitting down together, and we all seemed to be in about the same place in our lives. You know, young children is the biggest common denominator in our group. I remember I was so excited afterwards when we kind of formed our group. I felt as though I had really clicked with several people, and I was really excited about it. I thought it went great.
The curriculum for the first meeting was very informal. It was just an opportunity for everybody to kind of get to know each other.
I really look forward to it. We become very dear friends of ours. Our children play well together. Our daughter cannot wait to go. And it's literally my favorite night of the week. I really enjoy going.
And back to it gives you an opportunity to talk to other adults about God, which is a good experience for me personally, or I don't think anyone.
So if you consider yourself a guest, we love that. And we're okay with you being there, however long you want to be there as a guest. When you're ready to go to the next step and begin to meet some people and maybe have some spiritual conversations, we're ready for you. We'd love to receive you in the starting point environment, but there's other medium-sized things that we'll be doing. We'd love to see you move over into that point and make some connection to others. If you've been in community and experiencing the benefit of what that's like, we'd love for you to become more on board with our approach of how we're going to do this and try to help us expand that so that more and more people can benefit from those settings. The home is one of the best settings for relationships, and so we're investing in those homes in that way by training the leadership to lead an environment that sees people growing spiritually. We want to reform groups through GroupLink, though. We're not just going to launch groups from GroupLink and let them go for 15 years. We've got a strategy that reinvigorates the life of the groups. As you experience community, we need you to help start other groups when you're ready to come back in so that you can either lead or apprentice to lead or be a part of a group in order to help other people come along too. So if you've been with us, we're asking you to be a guide in some ways, to point people to where their next step might be as we work together not only to find Jacob, but to do it in a way that we're more likely to succeed in it for God's glory. So ultimately, it's not about how we do it. We picked a way. It's not about that. It's about the promise that God has made in Psalm 133 that's on the back of your insert. God has promised that when we work together, great things happen in our life and in the lives of others because He dispenses what only He can. Life change and blessings. So let's work together more in the future. Loved having you this weekend. Thanks for going a little longer. We'll guarantee it won't go long the other weekends, all right? God bless you.